Hey, so welcome to another one of the Hoover Mod videos. This is going to be number 5 in the list, and today I'm going to be talking about the 100% oil flow through the lifters. That's this piece right in here. And then I'm going to be talking about grooved rocker arm shafts. So let me mention grooved rockers here real quick. Now, you know that my stance on the swivel foot is that it's not effective, doesn't flow oil, so grooving the rockers is in fact, in a word, pointless. So we've covered that. Let me show you now the mods. This is the grooving of the rocker shaft. That's the grooving of the lifter that we're talking about. Let me do a quick summary just in case you don't watch the entire video. I've always said that at least one of these Hoover mods is going to work. The oil filter is not a Hoover mod. The oil filter is just a good idea. So the piece that's going to work is among the others that are listed in here, and one of those happens to be in today's video. You'll have to watch the entire thing to find out how and why. So let's get going. Well, these graphs right here represent, down here, cam load profile. We're going to see that there's velocity, acceleration, and of course lift. They don't actually specify the lift, but anyway, you can't really find these things for most camshafts. I've never seen one for a VW camshaft, but that's not that big a deal. You can take it to somebody who has one of these machines that reads your camshaft profile. So this particular website is put together by somebody who has one of these machines. You put the cam in and it reads your profile. So the black line right here happens to be the acceleration profile. And it's from this acceleration profile that we're going to be able to determine what kind of pressures are built up inside the push rod during its drive over the nose. So this is where we start, and we're going to approximate this black line right there. Okay, so having looked at those graphs, what you're going to see is an approximation of those other graphs. The acceleration, of course, being probably along this black kind of dashed line right there. The velocity, maybe it's a little bit tighter in this area. And the lift, maybe a little bit more in this area right here. But this approximation is pretty decent. What you need to do is find out what these accelerations are. From the accelerations, I can find out how much pressure is going up and down. Well, I've actually got one going up and down through the push rod itself. So how do you figure out what this A, B is? These are going to be like constants associated with the acceleration. Once I've got these constants, I can scale against this 1, and I can scale against that 1. So let's assume that this 1 is 1 second. That means this it's rotating very slowly, and that this 1 inch lift right here is actually way too much lift. But I can speed it up, and I can ratio it as well for duration of camshaft. There's a camshaft. You got different kinds of lobes, so you can ratio back for the RPMs, and you can ratio back for the lobes that you've got. So what do you actually have to do in order to do this? Well, you've got to do an integral. To go from this guy to this guy, you integrate this to arrive at this. And to go from this one, velocity, back to lift, you have to integrate that to get to here. When you do this particular integral, it's going to be in terms of A and B, which means that when you come over here, you're going to have something that's in terms of some A and B. There's going to be an A, and there's going to be a B, and it's going to be equal to 0, and a whole bunch of stuff in here, along with some numbers. And when you set this up to be an equation like that, you're not going to be able to solve it. I've got like 2 unknowns and 1 data point. And you come back over to here, you're also going to get something that's in terms of A and B. But in this particular case, it's going to be equal to 1. Those of you who've done a little bit of math, you realize that if I've got an A and a B and a 1, an A and a B and a 0, what I have here are 2 equations in 2 variables, which means I can use linear equations to solve this. So in order to actually do the math associated with this, you have to do an integral, 2 of them. Integral from there to here, an integral from here back to here, and then you use linear equations in order to solve these pieces right here. When you've done the integrals and you solve for those equations, you come back over here and you realize that A is equal to 6/7. And this one happens to be equal to 4/7. This is the kind of math that you need to be able to do. Now, like I said, having gotten these things right here, I can now ratio everything back. To do that, I go to a spreadsheet. And here we are at the spreadsheet. So I believe I should be able to use my mouse pointer to highlight a few things. First of all, we went back and we found those ratios off of the calculations. And I plugged them in here where appropriate. And I need to be able to take them back to a particular cam. In this particular case, I've got a lift of 0.33 and a duration of 250, which means this is approximately a stock cam. I know the stock cam is about 270, but with solid lifters, you got some take up on the open and close ramp. So I'm taking that duration off. And I've got the ability to put in an RPM, so all that stuff is taken care of. I want you to look at something here real quick. It's important to make note of the oil inside your push rod. I've gone with a 10W30 oil. It has a particular density, and if I multiply that density by the length of the push rod, which is about 10.5 inches, you would come up with a certain number of pounds per square inch, which is a pressure. But that's a pressure under 1 gravity, which is why later in this process I'm going to take things and I'm going to convert them into gravities, so that I simply take that value and multiply it by the number of gravities to arrive at the new pressures. Now, once you get down into the bulk of it, there's just a whole bunch of little teeny tiny pieces that you got to look at. And ultimately, when you get done, you come down to here, and I did tell you to need the accelerations. These are all your accelerations. But we go from this page, but this is what we're looking at. Recognize these pictures right here. They should match pretty much what you saw on that whiteboard write-up. This is the acceleration. It peaks, it comes down, and does this little doodad over here. You take that, you integrate it to this right here, you integrate that, and you get this right here. This all goes back to these guys over here, which is the acceleration, the velocity, and the lift. Lots of computation going on in there, but ultimately you come back and you see that I've got 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, and 5,000 RPMs. These are metric velocities. This 1737 represents the peak velocity, which would be that one right there, because I'm working with 1,000 RPMs. So given this velocity is a linear. If I go 5 times as fast, this would be 5 times that. Accelerations are not linear. Accelerations are squared ratios. So as I go up, this one being twice that is actually 4 times as high, and then this becomes, what do we got, 3, 2, that's 9 times, and then what do we got here? This is 4 squared, 16 and 25 times as much. Pardon me, let me kill the cat here real quick. I thought we had to quiet it down. Anyway, there are 2 directions that we're going with the acceleration. Notice that this acceleration up in this area is bigger than this acceleration. It's 1, 2, 3 plus. This is 1, 2, and a little bit. So the accelerations obviously are going to be higher there than they are here. We then move into the US. We go from the metric to the US because we kind of like doing that. We get velocities. These I believe are in inches per second. Accelerations become inches per second. Now these don't really make a lot of sense. However, we can convert them into gravities. Gravity seems to be something that everybody understands. 32 feet per second. It's a gravity. Earth normal. So we convert these accelerations into Earth normal gravities. It's 68 times the force of gravity at idle that is happening inside. Let me see if I can put it in front of the camera. Inside that push rod as it goes up and down at idle. How many gravities on that side? This is going to be when it pushes, hang on a second, as you push it off. Okay, you get that gravity. As it goes over the nose, you get that particular gravity. Continuing along, there's just a little computation that'll give you the PSIs. These are the pressures that occur inside the push rod under those accelerations. Notice that as you get high, those PSIs become extremely high. Okay, down here at idle, the pressures inside significantly exceed those of what's being given by the pump. Even though they're not particularly high, they're better than what you get from the pump. And actually, it's a rather effective oil pump so long as you keep it in stock configuration. That's why I have this thing listed as stock right there. So when you push off, the push off requires, which band is it? This band right there. This is not the band. It takes this one right there. So the oil that's in there wants to go down that direction and out the little hole, and it fills this band up right here, but this band is not attached to any of the rest of the oil system, so you get a massive buildup of oil pressure inside that band right there. No oil pump is 100% effective, so I've taken it and ratioed it back, taking a little bit out. 80% of that's pretty decent, I would say. So that gives you some oil pressures. Those oil pressures, look at those, are used to lubricate the bore that this thing sits in. That is significantly higher pressures than you will get from the oil pump, which we see over here. And of course, these oil pump pressures, as I showed, are going to be the pressures that you see back at the sending unit, and are not the pressures that you would actually see by the time the oil gets back to the lifter. So look at these oil pressures. Okay, so we've taken it down to 85%. Just cruising down the road, you're looking at 160 psi being thrown into that right there. Now, as you go over the nose, I've got it at 95% in stock. Now, the reason I've got it at 95%, why it is so incredibly efficient, is that the stock system really isn't designed to allow oil to escape. So if you don't allow the oil to escape, and it's not actually pumping any volume, then all of the energy gets put in, basically left as pressure. So you get a much higher pressure. So that's what these pressures end up being. And again, as you're going over the nose, you've got that kind of pressure going into your rocker arm, around the shaft, trying to prevent galling. So then you hoover mod. Now when you hoover mod, it of course takes that, let's go back, it takes the little hole that sits right there, and the oil pressure that would ordinarily build up inside this band right here, it's now allowed to bleed off. So you effectively get no oil pressure except what you get from the oil pump. Plus a little tiny bit, I've allowed you 20%. There is some friction, so you will get some buildup, but it's not significant down low. But notice that it's not horrible as you go up. I mean, it's nowhere near what you would get with stock, but it is not anywhere near as good as what you could have. This kind of explains why the hoover mod doesn't immediately destroy your lifter bores. There is a certain amount of residual leftover pressure that allows the lifter bore to be lubricated. It's just going to wear out sooner. Oh, he didn't tell you that, but yeah, your lifter bores will wear out sooner if you hoover mod. Now we go to over the nose. Notice I've given you a pretty decent percentage going over the nose. The reason for this pretty decent percentage is that in order for the oil to go out of the system, it has to pull air into the system, and it's not going to pull in a whole lot of air, so you're not going to lose a whole bunch of efficiency going over the nose, but you don't certainly get the 95%. So I think I've allowed it, let me see, I've allowed you 75% of the 95%. That's not too bad. So you get some pressure going over the nose. Now, if we come over here, this is the hoover mod plus the hole. You remember in the last video I showed a guy who had poked a hole up at his, what do we call those, the adjusting screw. So he popped a hole at his adjusting screw. Well, of course, if you stick a hole up there, it's going to allow the pressure to bleed off, which means I'm allowing you, I believe, 25% of the 95%, which gets you to 18%. So you don't have a whole lot of pressure going into your rocker to rocker shaft in order to prevent galling with the hoover mod. So you ask yourself, well, how come he's not getting galling with the hoover mod? So you have to go back in and start reading his blog. Yeah, let's just leave it like that for right now as far as the spreadsheet goes. Obviously, bottom line, look at these numbers here. The stock system puts in significantly higher oil pressures than either of the hoover modded systems, but they're not, it's not like night and day. It's not black and white, on and off. You still get oil pressure with the hoover mod, it's just nowhere near as good as stock. Alright, let's take a look real fast at this particular column. This happens to be, a hoover modded motor, so it's got the sliced open lifters. This column happens to represent, again, this particular portion of the acceleration profile. These oil pressures indicate not oil going out to the head, but rather oil coming back from the head. These are backwards pressures. I mean, the push rod goes left, right, left, right. One of those pressure settings is going to cause oil to go, of course, backwards through the system. This is what you get when you expose through that cut in the lifter. You've got some oil that's trying to push its way out towards the head. That comes from the oil pump over here. And then you've got oil pressure coming from the motion, which is these guys over here. And the oil pump pressures, say 7 versus 22, the oil pressure over here at the pump is going to lose every single time, which means that every single one of these, obviously, as they get higher in RPMs, the pressures are going to go up. That means you're pushing oil out of the system rather than into the system, which means that during this particular time, which happens twice, now this is going over the nose, but this is only half a cycle. This represents only half of what's going on. You'll see this one twice. Now, in one of the earlier videos, I told you that this particular piece is about 25% of the time, and being that this is half of what's going on, that means this other half must also be about 25% of the total time. Since 25% of the total time, it's not putting oil into the head, and it's impossible to put oil into the head, we know that certain things that were going on inside the system were beyond Hoover's capabilities. So let's go back and take a look at what he says. Okay, and there we go. The cam followers allowed the oil to reach the heads 100% of the time instead of only when the valve was actuated. No. Absolutely no way. That's a completely and totally false statement. He didn't understand the dynamics. Okay, the guy was in his early 20s. You do understand, when he was doing this hoover modding stuff, it was late 1950s, and I believe that he was born in the late 1930s. I don't know. I haven't been able to find an obituary or anything like that on the guy, and I've not found his actual birthday contained in any of his writings. So I don't know. I don't even know how old he was when he died. I do know the date that he died, but I don't know when he was born. When he was doing this stuff, he was in his early 20s, and he was a noob. He was not the ancient, veteran, wizened mechanic that he was toward the end of his life. He was a newbie. He was putzing around. He didn't have a freaking clue. So I don't blame him for making statements like this when he was in his 20s. But as he got older, he just assumed that he was right. Nobody ever corrected him. So he never had a chance to override himself, go back and learn something, which is too bad. I think that he probably would have valued something. But anyway, I do an awful lot of math, and I realize that some of you guys probably don't want to watch the math, but I'm not going to condescend to you as though you're incapable of it. If you actually wanted to, that stuff's really not all that difficult. You could do it. Anyway, we need to move on, but that is one of the things that he got wrong. It is clearly wrong, absolutely wrong, not at all possible to put oil into the head 100% of the time. Okay, now keep in mind those lowered oil pressures, and let's take a look at what we got right here. So what does he do? First of all, he's modified the cam followers to allow oil to reach the heads 100% of the time. Okay, we just talked about that. We know that doesn't happen. We were still seeing galling on the right-hand rocker shaft, which is what they were seeing before, and then he adds the following, plus an occasional hairpin fracture. Okay, so basically what he's telling you is that after they modified the cam followers, plus an occasional hairpin fracture. What this tells you, according to his own documentation and his own writing, is that after they opened up the cam followers, they actually made things worse. So they went from not only seeing galling on the right-hand rockers, which was there before, it's still there, they've also added hairpin fractures, meaning it lowers the oil pressures overall and makes things worse. Let's continue on with more of his stuff here. Okay, the next thing he does is basically two things at once. We're going to drill all the stuff out back in the case. That's what he's doing right here. This section right here is all about drilling holes in the case, which I'm not talking about in this particular video. With that as a clue, we groove the rocker arm shafts to match the oil channels drilled into the rockers. So we're going to talk about that one right now. And in order to do that, I need to actually go and do some math, and I'm going to go hit the whiteboard up again. Alright, so here we are with the whiteboard, and I'm going to compare the stock system, which is represented by this over here, with the hoover modded system, which represents a rocker arm, which has been modified with this channel. So what are we trying to inspect when we do this? Well, over here in the stock system, you got a rocker arm, sucks up its oil, oil comes out a little hole that's down in there. The diameter of that hole, 2.75 millimeters. So the oil comes down, has high pressure at this particular point, and then it tries to go into the crack. Tries to go into the crack that sits back in there. And that crack is tiny. So that's where we got this. I went to the Samba to pick up this number. It is, like, if you're touching it this side, you'll get 0.002, so it's about 0.001 if you were to center things. So that does that. Now we come over to this side. On this particular modified thing, we need to know how far across this is. It's 18 millimeters. So if I've got over here 2.75 millimeter hole like this going through a crack, which is less than this. It's less than that because if you look at it, the center line of the force goes through about right there, and the crack comes in over there. It's about 1/3 of the way down, so you would get about 2/3 of this. Now over here on this side, I've got 18 millimeters, but it goes both that direction and that direction across a crack that is 0.001 on average. So what I'm trying to do is figure out the area of that little crack. The oil comes down and it has to go out the area. So the computation for the area, of course, is going to be your pi. You've got to have a pi when you're working with circles. So you take the pi times the 2.75, which is the diameter. There's one hole, and the thickness of the crack is 0.039 millimeters. That's a fraction of this piece right here, about 2/3 of that piece. So you do that math and you come up with this guy right there. And over here I've got, of course, pi because we're going around in a circle. The crack here is 0.001, which is roughly half of that 0.015, so that's where this number comes from. I've got to go two different directions, so I've got a 2 here versus the 1 there, and it's 18 millimeters versus 2.75 millimeters. That results in a 2.873 millimeter square area to push oil through. So when I push these two together like this, when I do the math, the actual division here, I come up with a number 9.8, let's call it 9.82, which means the area that we're shoving the oil through here, 9.82 times better than there. So let's replace the question mark, and we will say that it is about 10 times better here on this side than it is over here. So it does in fact beat stock. And I've been telling you in all these videos that there is at least one piece of this thing that actually works, and this is the piece that actually works, that guy right there. As a matter of fact, this works so well, we're going to go back up and look at the spreadsheet again. It works so well that it actually compensates for the fact that slicing open your lifter is a really dumb thing to do. But you don't realize it's a dumb thing to do because this, when you put that crack in there, works so well. Now, we know that it works well, not just because I told you that it works well. Of all the Hoover modded things that are listed in his blog, and we're not going to include the oil filter. The oil filter is simply a good idea. It's not his. We're not going to credit him with that. So look at all the rest of the stuff that he's got. No, this one works. All the rest of the stuff is just kind of hokey. In addition to mathematically being proven to be more effective, you can see right here, this is the Type 4 rocker arm. Volkswagen incorporated this. It is the only one of the ones in his list that was incorporated. So here we are back at the spreadsheet. I want you to look real quick at these values right there, and those are absolutely horrible oil pressures. However, if you've put that particular modification with the ring around the rocker arm, and you boost this up by about a factor 10, that's actually better than stock, which means that you can get away with poking a hole in the top end, this part right there, and you won't fry your rocker arm with a bunch of galling. However, if you look at these oil pressures, this is when you slice open your lifters, those pressures don't get improved, and they absolutely suck relative to stock. And these pressures are the ones that control your lifters. So you can always pop open a valve cover and change your top end. If you blow out your lifters because you've done this, well, then you got to do a complete teardown. Okay, it's time to go to the forums. Let's start with the Samba, I think. Okay, it's always good to start with somebody who knows what they're talking about. Let's read what we got here. don't see the need. He's talking about the Hoover mod. Always have plenty of oil in the head. You do not need a flood of oil in reality. They only need to be wet to lubricate. But if you were trying to draw heat out of the head, no modifications you do is going to pump enough oil through the heads to make significant change in head. Yeah, Dale M is an absolute genius. Congratulations, man. Okay, Solverdi. What does Sol have to say? I don't think the oil is going to gain a significant amount of pressure from a pulsed metering delivery system. Okay, the operative word in this is think. If I can get it highlighted right there, that's the word, think. Solverdi did not think. Flying VW forums, homebuildairplane.com. So I've got Damar 836, not sure what that's about, but anyway, he says, I'll likely do the HPX mods as it can't hurt, as long as the pressure is bumped up. Okay, yeah, actually it can hurt, as I've showed you, that it's making things worse. You have no idea. If you slice open your lifters, you will hurt your motor. He also happens to say, as long as the pressure is bumped up, no, that's not going to save you. Here's a new one for me here, Volksrad.com. This is POP. Those of you who have a flying VW will know that POP is the same thing as POPs over on the flying forums. But POP has told us a few things here that indicate that he really doesn't understand what the hell is going on. Since a lot of engine cooling on a VW engine is from the oil, this is a completely, totally false statement. I know it. Dale over at the Salmon knows it. With the oil temp of 180, 185 degrees and a 90 to 95 degree day, right here, he's telling you about his oil temperatures, which means those are actually pretty darn cool. Conclusion, he's in fact not pulling any heat off of his heads with his Hoover mod. So, he doesn't even understand how the thing works. Wow, I've got cool oil temperatures. Well, that's an indication that you don't pull heat off the head, which is what Dale and I are telling you. Thanks, Pop. You've confirmed our point. Okay, we need to talk about one more thing, something called windage. So I know I've said this on the other videos, but the mechanism through which the bulk of the oil goes out to the head is not up here at the interface where this thing touches the rocker shaft. This thing is not really designed to let a lot of oil go through. What happens is you lose oil at the ends of your push rod. When this oil leaks out at this particular point, it of course is wrapped by the push rod tube, and as the pistons go in and out on the different sides of the motor, it of course changes the volume inside the case. So it goes small volume, now the pressure inside the case is high, it's got to bleed off, so it goes out the push rods. Then it goes up like this, increasing the volume, and you suck the air back in the other direction through the push rod tube. This is going to create windage. So I know that it creates windage, but what is generally thought? We go to the Samba, find just any general type guy, this happens to be Low Cash John, who says, I don't think the HPX mods have a significant effect on windage. Operative words there are the first three, I don't think. So he didn't think it through. He's even admitted he didn't think it through. We know there is windage though. We go back over to this thing. I used this particular article before, and let's see what the guy who was doing this on his flying VW did. Okay, he's put in some valve cover vents on his Hoover modded motor, and he says, when I landed and got out, the entire bottom of the fuselage was coated in oil. So what did we learn about windage there? The windage definitely puts oil up into the head. That oil is clearly going to get on things. It's probably going to cool the head a little tiny bit. It is, however, problematic if you stick a valve cover vent in. What else do we learn? Well, if there's this massive pile of pulverized oil going up to the head, we know that those pulses go both directions. That also means there's a massive pile of pulverized oil going into your case. Windage. I mean, there's any number of things that you do to stop the windage. They got the windage push rod tubes. They got the windage tray. They even got dry sump systems. But what this means is that all this oil going to the head, all this oil going to the case, inside your case you got all these moving parts, and these moving parts have got to work their way through all that windage. Why do you do a dry sump system? To make your motor more efficient by sucking windage out and preventing windage from getting in there. Hoover mod is a genuinely good way of creating windage. So if I've got this massive pile of windage and it's causing inefficiencies in my motor, then I have to put more gas into my motor to overcome the inefficiencies. The extra gas is going to make my heads hotter. But you've Hoover modded, so now you're making your heads cooler. The net result is that you basically have the exact same head temperature for the same amount of power. Now, if you're like one of these airplane guys, so you've got a particular amount of power, you got a particular amount of cooling. If you got rid of the windage, you'd actually have more freed up horsepower at basically the same temperature. Well, at some point, I've got to end one of these videos, so let's do the summary. See this guy right here? That little modification about putting the grooves. Okay, that's 2 thumbs up, 10 out of 10. Stock, performance, doesn't matter. Great modification. You know it's a great modification because Volkswagen stuck it on the Type 4. Got the blessing of the Volkswagen engineers. Let's see, what else do we do? Okay, take this guy right here. I've shown you that if you have put the modification into this guy right here, that you can then stick a hole up in here or put one down there and poke oil out either towards your spring in your head or up here towards your retainer. Either way, put a small hole in, get some more oil flow out. Not going to destroy anything if you do that. It's okay so long as you put that other modification in place. Slicing up with the lifter. This is beyond stupid. 2 thumbs down. 0 out of 10. Don't ever slice open your lifter. There are no benefits to doing this. It was designed pretty well from the factory. It is what it is. Don't mess with it. Now, as far as what goes on past this, the only thing that's left is the boring of the holes into the case. And if you're still not convinced that you should not be doing this, you really need to watch that video, because if you implement it the way whoever told you to implement it, you are going to make things worse. It is, however, something that, if done properly, can actually work, but Hoover didn't understand what he was doing, and I do. So I don't know if we'll ever get to that video. I really don't care that much about this modification enough to continue on. But anyway, other than that, I'll have more stuff later. So long for now.